You may remember from our last conversation discussing the war between Satan and God, the forces of good against the forces of evil, and how the forces of evil are constantly striving to overtake that which is good. We see that manifest in the Mount Sinai story, where the Hebrew people begin to sacrifice children to an idol, even while Moses is gathering the Ten Commandments. Now, what's interesting to me in all of that story is the first commandment. I am the Lord your God. Put no other God before me. I am Yahweh. Put no Elohim before me. And that word Elohim uh, is the latter gods. And, I am the Lord your God. Put no other God before me. It's the second God. Is the expression Elohim. But interestingly, throughout the Old Testament in Hebrew, Elohim also describes the spirit of God, right? So even in the language of it, you see this sort of competition between the words of what is going to represent God. Will it be Ruach Elohim, the spirit of God, or will it be Yahweh, the name God gave to Moses as he delivered the Ten Commandments? Uh, and this isn't the only place we see this kind of competition. So, in a bunch of other names for God, El Shaddai, uh, El Adonai, the expression El is a designation for God. And that El in Elohim and El Shaddai and etc. Uh, is a super fascinating word and term and idea. And it came, to the best of my understanding, came to the Hebrew people through the Canaanite culture. And El, was the father of the gods who wielded a lightning bolt. And before I go more into El, I want to touch on some of the angelic and demonic names because they also carry this tradition of the Elohim, right? Michael, Mikael, Raphael, Azrael, on the demonic side, Baal, right? Uh, Lucifer, interestingly, doesn't fit within the paradigm because, and again, this is just to the best of my understanding, it's a Latin term that was injected into the theology of the Old Testament. Uh, and so I would link in that Luciferian tradition closer to Azazel, again, ending with the El. And so this El sort of underscores this whole concept of God, the gods of this world, the angelic beings, the watchers, the fallen watchers. However you conceptualize it in the Hebraic tradition, you see this El as a word element, as a phonetic element that appears in all of the names. And I would suggest it's not a coincidence and that it derives itself from this Canaanite term El for the father of gods and the concepts that are associated with it. So let's unpack that a little bit. Right. So you've got the father of the gods, and with that, there's two things I think that are really important to think about. One is it's paternal, right? And the second is that this El figure was the head of the gods, was the top in the dominant hierarchy of the Canaanite gods. And he wielded the lightning bolt, much like Zeus, much like Odin, because these stories are all related to one another and all come from a shared mainframe of storytelling and understanding the world. And what's really interesting about the English language is when you start to spot the ELs, a lot of words that we use in everyday life fall back to these concepts. And I'm going to tell you what these words are specifically. But before I do, I want to talk about how these things are tied to God, are tied to goodness, right? But are not actually God Himself. And I think it's important that we look carefully at these ideas as a sort of nexus point where the competition and the fight of the gods will actually play out, right? So let's first talk about representative authority in El, the Canaanite father of the gods, and look at terms that we have. We have elections where elite members of society are selected by an electorate. Um, and you can see in all of that language how it carries this tone of a sort of dominance hierarchy, right? The elite are higher in the social food chain than the common folk. Um, the elected officials are literally embodiments and representatives of the bodies which they represent, right? So whole communities. Let's look at uh, not just the authoritative and sort of political aspects to the term El. Let's also remember he wielded a lightning bolt. Now, isn't that an electrical idea? uh, I don't want to belabor the point, but electricity, electromagnetism also carries shares the same root, El, with this El, the father of gods from Canaan, whose associations are embedded into Western civilization. It's not just Christian people. It's embedded into our language itself, as I hope I just gave some evidence of. Now, the idea that these things can turn bad might seem strange, but let me eliminate all of your doubt, right? Because, like, as suggested to me, this is one of those terms where the battle between good and evil shows up, and there's no more easy way to see how important some of these concepts are than to look at Black America, right? Uh, Today is November 30th, 2021, and all morning I listened on the radio to different talk show personalities discuss a young child in Chicago, an 11-year-old black kid who has been arrested repeatedly for carjacking. And, the mayor comes on and says, we need the supports and etc. What is to be done? And I think it's pretty simple. Like, we got to bring black men and black fatherhood back into black communities. It frustrates me. I write a lot on Facebook about how I think the Democratic Party should pay reparations to black people and also to conservative Americans, but first to black people. because I look at all these sins and crimes and not just hateful, but like really sociopathic and evil things that have occurred to Black America throughout the time that they've been here. Uh, including to this day, I just think so often I think we're a remarkably sadistic culture, and we just don't admit it to ourselves, right? So I hope just in the sense of fair mindedness that everyone will grant me that slavery was a really raw deal for Black America, right? Just was not good. Now I think that it was largely political, and that's a part of my bias, which is not to say I'm even pro Republican necessarily, but in terms of the history of this country, the Democrats are the party of slavery. The Democrats are the party of the Jim Crow era. They're the party of segregation. When the KKK was at its most virulent and violent and evil, they were the bootjacks of the Democratic Party. The racial rioting that occurred through large patches of our history. I mean, and I'm not even super well schooled on this particular topic, but certainly from 1860 to 1920, before Black people really started to vote Democrat, the KKK was not only terrorizing people. This is what bugs me. Nobody looks past that, and I understand that's a weird thing to say because people being hung by trees is pretty awful, pretty hard to look past that. But I think it's important to also gaze at property destruction in the KKK, because the KKK wasn't just killing people; they were burning down Black homes and businesses. And a rhetorical question I have for a lot of my Black friends, when we're speaking about these kind of issues, is do you think that Black America is better off now, or in or 100 years ago, before they as Black America was starting to vote Democrat? And it's crazy because the answer is, in many ways, 100 years ago, because at least at that point, Black people were allowed to own things with capitalism, were allowed to create businesses, generate wealth, and their families were intact. It's no secret to anyone that the lack of Black fathers is a major issue for Black America. And I look at our criminal justice department as being implicit in that. But not only that, but I look at policies like the man in the house welfare, which encouraged especially Black women to not encourage them, but made Black women choose between getting a government welfare check or having a father in the house for their children. Now, what kind of sadistic choice is that to force a person to make? And I will point it out that that's just another Democratic policy. There's a real cultural divide in America amongst white people, and I wish sometimes that that divide was more represented in how many Black Americans talk about racism and the history of this country. I understand that there is systemic oppression. I post every day about abolishing slavery without making an exception for criminals. I think it's just remarkably evil and cruel that we would have and I say this with bunny ears, a racial population that was enslaved, and we would even 60, 160 years after institutional slavery was abolished, we would still make these people live under the shadow of slavery. Like, how twisted is that? And I don't, put that on anyone. Well, if I was to put that on anyone in particular, I'd put that on the Republican Party, who was solely um, in control of the government after the Civil War. It is so ironic because just like when God gave the Ten Commandments to Moses, that was the moment that the devil struck. And just when the Christian people of America thought they had scored a victory against the scourge of slavery is when the devil struck, right? Because that's just how the story goes. And that's when the exception was made for slavery. But to turn the conversation, now that we've kind of commented a little bit on, and I haven't explored it deeply, but the importance of Black fatherhood. Let's go back to that concept of El, back to ancient Israel, back to ancient Judaism. Um, because fatherhood is and always has been important. It's no secret to any male that a part of fatherhood is protecting the wife and kids. It's not a secret. It's not a surprise, and it's appropriate. That's exactly what men should do. And historically, systematically, America has allowed Black men and Black fathers to be removed, like this major thread of social fabric, to be removed from their communities. And we sit around and wonder why 11-year-old kids are out carjacking. We wonder why there's no intergenerational wealth, or little intergenerational wealth in the majority of Black America, while fatherhood rates have, dropped dramatically even over the last 70 years. Now, I haven't fact checked this, but my understanding is that Black fatherhood was at like 75% in the 60s, and it's down to like 20 or 25% today. And there's all these studies that show how important a father is in the family for raising children and helping them be stable. And I'm not trying to dig on single mothers here at all. Um, so please don't take it that way. But the reality is that, shocker, men are important when it comes to raising children. Who would have known? And so back to El, you can see how, at least in my perspective, the attack on Black men and on Black fatherhood is especially dark and devious and evil. Something that's really interesting. I don't recall the name of the town at this moment, but one of the first Black cities in California was a little agricultural town. It was doing really well and growing, and had like community centers and schools, and was doing just fine. Uh, but the town had a contract with like a local agricultural business to deliver water because California. It was dry, and despite having a contract that was in place before the town was ever built, the contract was not fulfilled, and it destroyed the entire town and everything that the people had worked toward. And that's just one of many sad tales of Black America. I mean, that's not even talking about things like Rosewood. It's not even talking about racial riots. That's talking about the government's failure to enforce legal contracts. Right? So, like the fatherhood concept of El, can go awry and be used to harm people. So too can providing things like power and water to a community, right? Also, the systems of representation can go awry and can be used for evil because this legal contract was not actually enforced, right? So these concepts that are close to God, close to Yahweh, but actually Elohim, are concepts that we should really look at with a lot of scrutiny and look at very carefully and understand both how these concepts can be great and good for everyone, right? So great that they approach God Himself, but also understand that they are not God. And so these are the very ideas, the very institutions, the very relationships which are most prone to being used by the devil as weapons against us. And the devil is inside us, right? Inside of everybody. I'm not going to get all crazy about it, but it's certainly within the Democratic Party. It always has been. You know, I think that slavery, as hateful as racism is, slavery was more sociopathic and unemotional than being like filled with hatred and derision. You know, you don't have to look very deeply into slavery to know that much of what was being done to most slaves uh, came from a startling lack of humanity, right? Like a real psychopathic and sociopathic bent that exists within the human spirit. And I would suggest manifest itself politically within the Democratic Party, which is why they're always involved in such devilish crap, like destroying the black family, like not enforcing a legal contract, like shutting off power, like uh, bombing Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, right? Like, and there comes a point where I think, as a culture, need to be more honest with ourselves about this type of stuff. It's not true, and it's certainly not fair to pretend the racism of one political party is systemic or is shared amongst people who are bitterly divided on issues like the role of government, the role of contracts in our lives, whether they should be enforced, whether there should be double standards, right? So as we grow in our abolition community, I hope we stay aware of how the things that are best for us and best for our society are the most susceptible to being turned into the greatest weapons against us. Because as great as all of those things can be, as great as L can be, right? L is not Yahweh and should not be placed before Yahweh. And so, with that said, thank you all for the listen. And I will put the name of the city I was referencing in the description. Have a good day. Please like, please subscribe, and please share to help get this message out. People aren't property, not of the government, not of one another. And we have to bring slavery to an end. The abolition of all forms of human slavery, without exception. And as we explore these concepts more, we'll dig not only into other expressions of L, like Ba-El, right? It's easy to see how that can go awry, but other ideas as well. And this week the Ghislaine Maxwell trial is happening. Although I'm not ready to comment on that specifically yet, there are clear ties to the human trafficking scene that we're seeing now and to Christianity. And we will be exploring all of those concepts and more. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.